Hi there. I'm Aileen. 15 years ago, my parents cut me out of their lives, told everyone I walked away, but I didn't. They pushed me out, quietly. They erased my name from the will, faked a DNA test to say I wasn't my mother's daughter, and gave my future to my sister. Now I've returned, not for revenge, but with receipts. They invited me back for a wedding, but they didn't expect me to show up successful, or worse, for them, unafraid. And when I spoke, the whole room fell silent. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, weighty, and so pristine it didn't look like it belonged in my mailbox. No return address, just my initials. A.S. Inked in the kind of handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. Elegant, controlled, familiar enough to freeze me mid-step in the hallway of my apartment building. I stood there for a moment, blocking the doorway, groceries hanging from my wrist, my heart not racing, just holding. It wasn't fear. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Like someone whispering my name in a language I'd spent years forgetting. By the time I got inside, I already knew what it was. Not because I'd received anything like it before, but because no one in my family sent anything without a purpose. I set the bag down, peeled the flap back, and there it was, an invitation. Hand-pressed gold trim. Grand Solace Hotel, Seattle. Delphine Shipman and Kenneth Bianchi cordially invite you to their wedding. Delphine, my sister, Kenneth. The man who once looked me in the eye, in front of 6 venture capitalists, and reduced my work to cute potential. That was 2017. I was 28, hungry, pitching a community-based health model for underserved cities. He was polished, powerful, and dismissive. "You've clearly put thought into this," he'd said, tilting his head like I was a middle schooler reciting a science fair speech. "But maybe give yourself more time. You're still figuring out who you are." No investment, no follow-up, just that look, the kind you give someone you've already written off. And now he's marrying Delphine. I dropped the invitation on the counter and stared at it like it might catch fire. No personal note, no explanation, just a request for my presence, as if the last 15 years hadn't happened, as if I hadn't been cast out of that family like a stain on their perfect white linens. I hadn't heard from them since the day I walked out of our Chicago home with nothing but a duffel bag and a voicemail from my mother telling me not to come back unless I was ready to behave like a real daughter. Whatever that meant. And now this, not an olive branch, not even a breadcrumb. This wasn't forgiveness. It was strategy. They needed me there. For appearances, for optics. Aileen, the forgotten sister, reappearing in the background of some posed wedding photo to sell a fantasy of reconciliation. I picked up the invitation again. Delphine's full name, Dr. Delphine M. Shipman, embossed in cursive. She was always the star, the one who smiled just right, who sat with her knees crossed and her voice steady, who wore ambition like perfume. And me? I was the storm they kept out of the photo frame. I texted Ethan, my husband. "I'm going." He replied in under 10 seconds. "You sure?" I didn't blink. "Yeah, it's time." I moved to the closet, reached past the everyday blazers and weekend sweaters, and found the dress I hadn't worn yet. Navy silk, sharp neckline, backless, nothing showy, just presence. The kind that walks into a room and silences it without saying a word. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, I was still standing there in front of the mirror, barefoot, hair pulled back, holding that envelope like a chess piece. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel sadness. Just a click. That sound in your gut when you know exactly what they've done. They thought I'd show up and smile. Thought I'd nod politely and pretend everything was healed. But they forgot one thing. I didn't survive them. I outgrew them. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. The dress hung back on its hanger, untouched. I'd laid the envelope down, but it kept pulling my eyes from across the room like a lit cigarette smoldering on a table. I wrapped myself in my robe, moved to my desk, and sat, barefoot, still in control, but with something old stirring inside me. Next to my keyboard sat a chipped blue mug, half full with cold coffee from hours earlier. Beside it, a flash drive with a cracked case, the one I'd carried through 3 apartments and 2 cross-country moves. Most people wouldn't notice it, wouldn't think anything of it. But to me, it was the only thing I'd managed to save from that year. The only proof that once, I built something that mattered. I plugged it in. The folder I hadn't touched in over a decade flickered to life. Before it all fell apart. Inside were lecture notes, datasets, draft models, and one presentation deck titled Nutritional Access Equity. I clicked it open and let the slides scroll on their own. Each chart, each bullet point, each line of logic was mine, and yet none of it carried my name anymore. It started in my second year at the University of Illinois. I was 19, bright, over-caffeinated, running on ambition and ramen noodles. That project, my project, was my heart. I'd spent 6 months developing a community-based nutrition framework using real-world surveys from low-income neighborhoods across Chicago. It was messy, idealistic, maybe even naive, but it was mine. One Friday, Delphine dropped by my dorm unannounced. She said she was checking in, but her tone was too sweet, too rehearsed. She brought takeout and a bottle of wine, sat on my bed like it belonged to her, and asked about my work. I was flattered. Delphine never asked me about anything before unless it involved cleaning up her mess. I showed her everything, my code maps, the logic trees, the way I modeled behavioral change through community kitchens. She leaned forward, smiling wide. "You really did all this?" she said. I thought she meant it. I thought for once she was proud of me. I couldn't have been more wrong. The following week, my files vanished from the shared campus server. I'd backed up most of them, but not the latest version. I remember staring at the blank screen, refreshing it over and over, as if it might magically reappear. Then the email came through the student network. "Congratulations to Delphine Shipman, recipient of the Women in Health Science Award." Attached was a photo of her standing beside the dean, holding a certificate with the title of my project printed in bold. I didn't cry. I just stood there frozen. At the Spring Scholarship Gala, Delphine gave a speech. She wore a soft lavender dress and spoke like she belonged in the world of microphones and applause. "This project was inspired by the invisible struggles in our own communities," she said. "We don't need to reinvent nutrition. We just need to make it reachable." My words, line for line. I sat 3 rows back with a plastic name tag that read, "Volunteer." Our parents stood near the front, clapping like they'd raised a savior. My mother leaned in toward me, voice clipped. "She just works harder than you, honey. Maybe take notes." I didn't respond. What was there to say? From that point on, I began to unravel quietly. A month later, a post appeared on the student blog, anonymous, titled "The Real Aileen Shipman." It painted me as manipulative, dishonest, a compulsive victim. Said I'd faked projects before, that I didn't belong in the program. There was no author, of course, but the tone, the phrases, the timing, I knew. Delphine didn't just take the spotlight, she burned down the stage behind her. After that, my email dried up. Classmates stopped replying to project threads. A professor pulled me aside and said gently, "You may be right, Aileen, but right doesn't always win. Perception does." I nearly dropped out that semester, but I didn't. I buried myself in work, rebuilt my model from scratch, took night shifts at the hospital cafeteria to pay tuition, alone, without applause, without credit. Now, 15 years later, that blog post is still up, still searchable, still poisoning the well. I took a screenshot, saved it under a new folder, receipts. Then I reopened my original research file and sat with it, not to grieve, not this time, but to remember what they built on top of me. Not just a lie, but a career, a reputation, a public image that never belonged to her. She didn't just plagiarize a project, she rewrote my role in the world. The glow of the screen still lingered on my retinas, even after I shut the laptop. I sat there, unmoving, until the shadows in the apartment had shifted from indigo to black, broken only by the blinking streetlight outside my window. A cool draft passed under the window frame, and suddenly I needed to move. I stood up slowly, crossing the room toward the filing cabinet shoved beneath my bookshelf. It had been years since I opened that bottom drawer, the one I once swore I'd never touch again. But pain has a way of loosening locks you thought you'd sealed shut. The key was still taped behind the bookshelf, right where I left it 6 apartments ago. My fingers found it blindly. The drawer creaked as it slid open. Files sat in messy stacks, covered in dust and time. I flipped past leases, medical receipts, expired tax documents, until I saw it. A plain white envelope, no return address, no letterhead, just my name typed in a font too formal, too calculated. I remembered the day it arrived, spring 2010. I was back home from school, waiting to hear from the estate attorney after my grandfather passed. Instead of condolences, I received paperwork. Inside the envelope was a copy of his revised will, dated just 2 months prior, and my name was gone. Cleanly, like it had never belonged there in the first place. Clipped to the back of the will was something worse, a DNA test. I hadn't touched it since. Now I unfolded it with a steadier hand than I expected. It read, "Maternal match inconclusive." The test listed Maureen Shipman as the alleged mother, my mother, except, according to this document, there wasn't enough genetic evidence to prove we were related. At 19, it wrecked me. I believed it. Why wouldn't I? It was printed. It had lab logos. It was official looking in the way lies sometimes are. But now I saw the holes immediately. The lab was called Pacific Diagnostics, a name I hadn't thought about in years. I pulled out my phone and ran a quick search. Closed in 2016, no corporate listing, no phone number. Nothing but a fraud scandal article buried on page 4 of the search results. "Shell Lab," I muttered and texted Ethan. "Need your help tracing an old clinic. Possible wire fraud." He replied within minutes. "You finally opened the drawer, didn't you? I'll start digging." By midnight, he sent me a link to archived financial records. There it was, plain as day. A $4,800 payment from Maureen Shipman to a numbered P.O. box registered under a Nevada address, 2 weeks before the DNA test was issued. So no, it wasn't just a cut from the will. It was a deletion. They didn't just disown me. They orchestrated my erasure. I sat down, knees pulled up to my chest, the DNA report resting in my lap. The rage didn't come yet. Just a cold, expanding clarity. It felt like staring at my reflection and realizing it wasn't a mirror at all. Just another window they'd painted black from the other side. As I sat with that truth, I reopened my browser and returned to the student blog, the one that had never been taken down. I typed the title into the search bar. The Real Aileen, Liar, Thief, Victim. There it was. Anonymous, sharp, full of bite without any proof. It didn't need proof. It just needed to sound believable. "You know how she is," one line read. "Always playing the wounded bird to get sympathy." A phrase Delphine used once in an interview, word for word. That passive-aggressive, Midwestern-taught poison. Polite on the surface, lethal underneath. Of course it was her. She couldn't confront me directly, so she killed my reputation in whispers. And people believed it. Because they wanted to. Because it was easier to doubt a woman without power than one with a press kit and a polished smile. As I compared the post's date with the one on the DNA file and the estate paperwork, something sickening clicked. All within the same 3-month window. The will, the blog, the test. It wasn't a coincidence. It was choreography. One aimed at making sure I wouldn't just be dismissed. I'd be discredited. Because what's easier than cutting someone out of your life? Making sure no one asks where they went. Now they want me back. To pose for photos. To smile in press releases. To be proof that time heals. But they didn't invite me because they missed me. They invited me because they need me to stay quiet. I traced the edge of the envelope, now creased and softened by time. Then I picked up my phone and began recording, my voice calm. "This is for record, 2010, altered will, same quarter, falsified DNA, anonymous blog post, linguistic match to Delphine, conclusion, pattern confirmed, erasure was intentional." I paused, then added one more line. "This time I'll be the one writing the narrative." I didn't tell Ethan where I was going. He'd ask questions I didn't want to answer yet, not until I was sure. I just said, "It's something I need to do alone," and booked a one-way to Chicago. It was still dark when I left San Francisco. By the time the plane touched down in Illinois, the sky was streaked with pale sunlight, barely warming the sidewalks downtown. The city hadn't changed much. It still smelled like early morning exhaust and damp stone after a late summer rain. Familiar, but no longer mine. I didn't go home. I didn't even look toward the old neighborhood. Instead, I took a rideshare straight to a modest corner office in the West Loop. I'd called ahead, booked a generic document consultation under my maiden name. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to cancel. When I stepped into the lobby, the woman behind the desk barely looked up. "Mr. Penn will be with you shortly," she said. Penn. His full name was Julian Penn. Back then, he was a junior associate, green, bookish, uncomfortable in expensive shoes. I remembered him because he was the only person in that stuffy estate meeting who looked at me like I was human. 10 minutes later, he opened the door himself. He paused when he saw me. No handshake, no smile, just a quiet, resigned exhale. "Aileen," he said softly, "it's been a long time." We sat in a tiny conference room with a window that faced a brick wall. He didn't ask why I was there. Maybe he already knew. I slid 2 documents across the table, the revised will and the DNA test, both printed cleanly, both dated and notarized. I waited. He didn't touch them. "You knew," I said. "Didn't you?" His jaw tightened. He stared down at his hands, thumbs pressed together like a man bracing for confession. "I was 26, just got promoted to junior partner. That file? It didn't feel right. I flagged it. I asked questions." I leaned in, voice calm. "And then?" "They told me it was a family matter. Said I was overstepping. 2 days later, I was pulled off the case." "You were my last legal defense," I said, my voice now razor thin. "And they bought your silence for the price of a title." He flinched, but didn't argue. I watched him sit with the guilt, let it steep. I wasn't here to punish him, not really, but he needed to feel what I'd felt all these years, overlooked, overruled, erased. "I had no power then," he finally said. "But you do now," I replied. Silence filled the room like fog until he reached for the papers at last. He scanned the signatures, the dates, the lab name. "This wasn't even a real clinic," he muttered. "No, it was a front, and Maureen paid them." He closed the folder and set it down. "Why now?" "Because they invited me back," I said flatly, "and they expect a smile, not a reckoning." Julian hesitated. "What do you want from me?" I didn't smile. I didn't blink. "You helped erase me," I said. "Now you're going to help unerase me." A long breath passed between us. Finally, he nodded. "Send me everything you have. I'll start building the file." I stood to leave. "And don't warn them," I added. "You owe me that much." "I won't," he said. "But Aileen, this won't be easy." I didn't look back. It never was. By the time I boarded the return flight, the clouds had thickened over O'Hare. The turbulence matched the slow storm inside me, but I wasn't rattled. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I was aligned. The betrayal still pulsed under my skin, but it no longer controlled me. I had the truth now, and a witness. That changed everything. I watched the skyline fade behind the plane window. The city that broke me was shrinking beneath the clouds. They tried to silence the story. But now, I had someone ready to listen. I came to find a witness. I left with an accomplice, and that changes everything. The wheels touched down in San Francisco just before 7 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the glass towers in warm gold, while the rest of the city cooled into gray. I didn't waste time. I bypassed the carousel, took a rideshare straight home, and barely greeted the doorman. He looked up from his crossword to wave, then blinked when he realized it was me. Back in my apartment, I didn't take off my shoes. I walked straight to the hall closet, crouched behind the coats, and pulled out a lockbox the size of a bread loaf. Its metal was scratched, the handle was loose, but the key, Ethan taped it under the windowsill years ago, still fit. The lid creaked open. Inside, between old tax folders and faded birth certificates, was the file I hoped I'd never need again. 2 wills. One dated spring 2009. One dated fall 2010. I laid them side by side on my desk. The 2009 version had my name on it, clearly, boldly. My grandfather's final words in black and white. Aileen shall retain partial interest in the Shipman farmland and related assets. Irrevocable. The second will didn't mention me at all. Same paper, same font, almost. But if you looked closely, the margins didn't line up. The signature page, slightly crooked, as if copied and pasted. The notary seal was blurred, and the scanned initials on page 7 looked more like someone traced them by hand than signed them under pressure. Before Chicago, I would have doubted myself. But now, with J. Penn's quiet admission echoing in my ears, I didn't flinch. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a fabrication. I stared at the line that used to bear my name. Then I heard his voice again, my grandfather sitting on the porch with a wool blanket across his knees, handing me a lemonade I didn't want. This land'll always be part yours, no matter what your mother thinks. Now Delphine's name was listed as sole heir. They didn't just erase me, they handed her everything, then smiled like it was fair. I scanned both wills, named the files clearly, then crafted an email. Subject: Estate revision attachments. To message: undo it quietly, or I will do it publicly. You have 48 hours. Aileen. I didn't send it from my main account. I used a clean alias and encrypted the files. I'd learned that much from years of watching legal chaos unfold behind press headlines. You never swing unless your footing is solid. The reply came faster than I expected, under 2 hours, from Delphine. Hey, wow, a bit dramatic, don't you think? Let's talk before this gets messy. No need to involve strangers in family matters. I'm free Friday. No apology, no denial, just fake sugar over a blade. I didn't reply. Maureen, of course, said nothing, not a word. Not even a bounced-back error message. Her silence was an answer. They didn't think I had the courage or the proof or the spine, and that's where they always got it wrong. I stood by the window, watching traffic pulse below, then turned back to my desk. The time for quiet was over. I created a new folder labeled Phase 1, inside, the wills, the DNA test, the blog screenshot, notes from Penn, the money trail from Ethan's research. I exported everything to a password-protected drive, then attached a compressed version to an email for Noelle Weaver, the only journalist I trusted with this kind of poison. I didn't hit send. Not yet. But my finger hovered over the key. Let them wonder how loud I'm willing to get. They spent years perfecting their version of me. Docile, forgettable, erased. But I've kept every receipt, every bruise, every scar. They buried my name in ink and inheritance. But I learned to read between the lines. And now I write the next one. The next morning, I didn't start with coffee. I didn't even glance at the kettle. I sat down at the kitchen table surrounded by old records, paper and digital. Printouts, USB drives, a half-dozen open folders, receipts folded so many times the ink was starting to fade. I had everything spread out like puzzle pieces, not yet assembled but already telling a story I couldn't unsee. Ethan walked in just as I was organizing a pile of tax returns. He still had that just-showered look, damp curls pushed back, hoodie clinging to his shoulders, but there was nothing relaxed about his face. He wasn't even pretending to play it cool. You need to see this, he said. He slid his tablet across the table like it was carrying bad news. No preamble, no easing into it. Just hand it over the storm and let me stand in the rain. I turned the screen toward me and forgot how to blink. At first, I couldn't process what I was looking at. It was a document, several actually. A spreadsheet linked to a set of IRS filings tagged to my Social Security number. Income reports, consulting contracts, donations, medical equipment purchases, travel expenses, refunds, line after line, year after year. Some of it dated back almost a decade. I narrowed my eyes, heart beginning to pound against my ribs like it was trying to punch its way out. These are mine? I asked. But the question barely came out. I already knew the answer. Ethan nodded. Yours. At least that's how it's been filed. I scrolled slowly, teeth clenched. Most of those years I'd been sleeping in other people's guest rooms, working side gigs to scrape by, teaching part-time, living off bulk rice and borrowed Wi-Fi. I'd never even broken 40 grand a year, and yet, according to these records, I was somehow the beneficiary of consulting payments from institutions I'd never even spoken to. Tens of thousands here, tax write-offs there. Enough income to qualify for massive deductions. Enough to raise red flags, if anyone had actually been looking. I kept scrolling, jaw tight. Then I saw it. More family foundation. My stomach turned. They used your identity, Ethan said quietly. Probably as a shell, or maybe a shield. Their donations? Routed through your name. A few press pieces even mention you, carefully, subtly, like a myth they were keeping alive just enough to sound noble. He tapped into another document, this time a glossy internal PDF labeled Community Partnership Programs, Annual Report, page 3, inspired by Aileen Shipman's vision for equitable health access. I laughed, a small broken sound. It didn't even feel like it came from me. That's rich, I said, staring at the words like they were a bad tattoo on the world's most dishonest body. They didn't just erase me, I said after a long beat. They recycled me. Ethan's voice was low. They built a whole public image around it, around you. Quietly enough not to owe you anything. Loudly enough to make people believe the origin story. I pushed my chair back, harder than I meant to. The legs screeched against the tile. This wasn't just a case of stolen work. This was full-on identity laundering. Delphine hadn't just hijacked my proposal back then. She'd turned it into the cornerstone of the Moore brand. And somehow, despite being scrubbed from the credits, I'd been kept in the picture, just enough to be useful. I pulled up the Moore Foundation website, and there it was, front page, a slideshow of curated images. Delphine reading to children in a library. Delphine in a lab coat talking to doctors. Delphine handing a novelty check to a smiling hospital administrator. Beneath it all, a clean minimalist caption, rooted in Aileen Shipman's passion for change. Click. I went to the About Us tab, and there it was again. Another lie. A fabricated quote slapped under a sepia-toned photo of a stethoscope. Health should be a right, not a privilege. Aileen S. They gave me a damn tagline. They turned me into a mission statement. I let the mouse fall from my hand and stared at the screen, every nerve buzzing like I'd touched a live wire. It's not just fraud anymore, I said. It's branding. They turned me into a damn logo. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence in the room was thick enough to be its own witness. I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it Truth Packet. Into it, I dragged every file I had. IRS records with my SSN and fabricated income screenshots of the Moore Foundation's website, front page and about section. My original research proposal, timestamped, backed up, and notarized from years ago. The two conflicting wills. The DNA report that shattered their narrative. The blog post that tried to discredit me. J. Penn's notes and emails. He'd been digging too. Once everything was inside, I copied it all to an external drive. Then uploaded it to 3 separate cloud accounts under different aliases, passwords that even I had to write down. I wasn't going to lose the truth again. Then I opened my email. To Noel Byrne. Subject, the family store you didn't know. Attachments, evidence, confidential. Body, this isn't about revenge, it's about correction. You asked me once if I'd ever go on the record. This is me going on the record. I hit send before I could think twice. Ethan walked over and rested his hands gently on my shoulders. You okay? I didn't pretend. No. He didn't push, but I was calm, more than calm. I felt clear, like some old fog had finally lifted, and I could see everything for what it really was. I'm not trying to ruin them, I said. I'm just going to make sure they can't keep lying. Because that's what they'd done, rewritten history in real time, buried the facts, polished the lie. Left just enough of me in the narrative to keep their story airtight, but now I had every piece of the truth, and they'd used my name to cover their empire. Now I'd use it to take the mask off, and this time, they wouldn't get to write the ending. Seattle was gray when I landed. Typical, but it felt different this time, like the city had been holding its breath for years, waiting for me to return not as a guest, but as a disruption. I didn't check in with anyone. No texts, no announcements, no social media post. Just me and the quiet thunder rolling under my ribs. The wedding was still 3 days away, but the war had already started, and the first blow came faster than expected. I was reviewing financial statements in my hotel room when my inbox pinged. Subject line, Urgent Mental Health Record Notification. I frowned, opened it. Inside was an email from a hospital admin I didn't know, flagged confidential. Someone had submitted a request to access mental health history related to Aileen Shipman, citing public concern for recent erratic behavior and past incidents involving manic episodes. Attached was a PDF of a psychological assessment, dated 2009, signed by a psychiatrist who, upon quick search, had lost their license in 2015. I stared at the line under diagnosis. Possible bipolar 2. Follow-up recommended. My hand didn't shake. Instead, I laughed once. Low and bitter. Of course they'd try this. I picked up my phone and called Ethan. They're going for mental health smears now, I said. It's classic. Quiet, legalish, and absolutely them. Maureen? He asked. Too strategic. Delphine. He didn't argue. The evaluation was fake, sloppy, but dangerous enough to seed doubt, the kind of thing no one questions out loud but whispers behind closed doors. I called my attorney, flagged it to the Bar Association, and sent it to Noelle with the note, "They're panicking." Then I turned off my laptop, because another email had just arrived. Anonymous sender. Subject, "She wasn't supposed to be there." No body text, just an attachment. I opened it. It was a redacted hospital report from a children's clinic in Seattle, 2013. A 7-year-old boy admitted with mild asthma, misdiagnosed, given adult-grade medication, induced coma, treated and stabilized 2 weeks later. No charges. Case closed quietly. The attending physician, Dr. Delphine Gaskins. There was a second page, handwritten. I was the nurse on call. I knew the chart was wrong. I tried to speak up. They shut me down. But you can speak now. I sat still for a full minute, not out of shock, out of focus. I'd fought this entire time thinking I was up against a personal grudge, jealousy, erasure, inheritance. But this was malpractice. This was buried harm. And suddenly the stakes weren't just mine anymore. I forwarded the file to Penn, to Noelle, and to a private legal investigator I'd used once during a past acquisition battle. Make sure this can't be deleted, I wrote. Trace everyone who touched this file, quietly, fast. An hour later, I was on the phone with the Washington Medical Board, filing a formal complaint. Do you have cause to believe the report is valid? The woman asked. I didn't hesitate. I have reason to believe the report is true. The silence was purchased, and more people got hurt than we know. Then I sent one more email. To Delphine. No subject, no greeting. Just 3 words. I have it. She read it within 5 minutes. Didn't respond. Of course she didn't. That night, Ethan and I sat side by side in the hotel room, the only light coming from the soft glow of our screens. You're calm, he said. I looked over at him. I'm not calm, I said. I'm committed. And that's worse. For them. Because I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was defending the truth. For every person they buried with their image, every voice they silenced with reputation, every line they rewrote with bloodless precision, they tried to erase me, then they tried to discredit me. Now they'll have to face me. The ride to the Grand Solace felt like approaching the eye of a storm, not with fear, but with finality. I didn't feel nervous. There were no butterflies, no cold sweat, no urge to turn back. Just that strange calm that settles over you after the worst has already happened. When the fire's done burning and all that's left is what you decide to build or destroy in the aftermath. I stepped out of the car into a sunlit afternoon that felt like it belonged to someone else. The Grand Solace towered above me, gleaming like a false god. All polished glass and curated perfection, its front steps lined with white roses curling up gold-plated railings. The sound of a string quartet drifted from somewhere inside, violins tuned to the frequency of wealth. Inside, it smelled like champagne and control. Everything was immaculate. The marble floors, the uniformed staff, the strategically placed mirrors catching light just right. It was a place built to impress, to perform, but not for me. I didn't walk in like a guest. I entered like a fact. Every head in the lobby turned when they saw me. There was a moment, brief, breathless, where no one spoke. Just eyes locking onto the daughter who wasn't supposed to be here. The one they'd written off. The one they'd erased. I wore navy silk, clean lines, no jewelry. My hair pulled back, my expression sharp. The ballroom doors opened ahead of me. I didn't hesitate. As I stepped through, the room stilled, glasses hovering midair, conversations dying mid-sentence, the kind of quiet that only happens when the room collectively realizes it just became a crime scene, and the detective is holding the microphone. Delphine was near the center of it all, surrounded by donors, board members, family friends. Her expression faltered for the first time I could remember. Not panic, not fear, just a visible fracture in the porcelain she wore like armor. Maureen blinked once, composed herself like a machine resetting. Kenneth looked like he'd seen a ghost. And maybe he had. I didn't give them time to regroup. I walked past champagne flutes and stunned whispers, all the way to the front. My heels struck the marble with every step, louder than the music still playing in the background. There was a podium, a microphone already waiting. I took it. "You invited me here," I said, voice even, "but I brought something with me, something none of you expected. The part of the story that's never been told, at least not out loud." The projector screen behind me flickered on. Footage began to play. It was Delphine on a TEDx stage. Spotlights, applause, her voice polished and confident. She spoke about health equity, about systemic injustice, about data-backed change. But the words weren't hers. The research wasn't hers. The entire presentation, charts, models, even the mission statement, had been lifted, line by line, from my original files. From a proposal I wrote in a basement library with blistered hands and no grant funding. The timestamps played in the corner of the video. My name, Aileen Shipman, appeared on the original PDF cited in her presentation. The data, unmistakably from my undergrad thesis, scrolled on the screen. I let the silence settle. Then I spoke. "She didn't win that scholarship," I said quietly. "She didn't earn that applause. She borrowed my work, removed my name, and submitted it as her own." The room was hushed. Even the servers had stopped moving. The second clip began. No video this time, just audio. Maureen's voice, clear, cold, unfiltered, filled the ballroom. "Aileen's a parasite. She drains everything around her. She doesn't deserve to carry our name." The sound system didn't soften it. If anything, it sharpened every syllable. Gasps rippled across the room. Some guests looked down. Others looked directly at me. Donors and trustees stiffened, trying to parse what this meant. The story they'd believed was unraveling in real time. I scanned the crowd. Faces turned hard, pale, suspicious. Gregory stood near the back, hands clenched at his sides. He looked down at the floor, like he couldn't bear to watch, but couldn't walk away either. Delphine stepped forward, her voice uncertain. "Aileen, this isn't the place. This isn't the time," I cut in. "You've had 15 years. Kenneth shifted beside her. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, like the room had relit her from a new angle. "You used me," he murmured. "You used all of us." Maureen started toward the stage, her expression unreadable. Calm, but something coiled beneath it. I lifted a folder into view. "This contains documentation of financial misconduct connected to the Moore Foundation," I said clearly. "Falsified IRS activity, identity theft, and a suppressed malpractice case from 2014 that Delphine buried with legal threats." She stopped mid-step. I didn't flinch. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm not here to yell or beg or bargain. I'm here to document." Delphine's voice cracked. "You don't understand. It's exactly what everyone thinks it is," I said, louder now. "Maybe worse." The final slide blinked off. The screen went black. The silence didn't. The illusion had cracked open, and what spilled out wasn't just the truth, but the rot that had been hiding behind wealth and polish. For years, they told the story without me. They scrubbed my name, my work, my voice. So I rewrote the scene. They built a stage. I stood on it. They chose the audience. I chose the moment. They used my name to build an empire of lies, and now I used it, loud, clear, and unapologetic, to burn it all down. The ballroom cleared like air after a storm. No shouting, no scenes, just silence, the kind that follows truth when it finally outruns denial. I stood still as chairs scraped, murmurs swelled, and polished shoes disappeared across the marble. Some couldn't look at me. Some looked too long. But I didn't move. I didn't need to. They'd already heard me. 3 days later, Delphine's medical license was under review. The board posted a quiet, non-committal notice on their website. The Moore Foundation froze all public-facing activity, pending compliance audit. Kenneth released a single statement. "I was unaware of the extent of the misrepresentations. I've withdrawn from all family-related ventures. And Maureen? She locked herself inside the Mercer estate and declined all calls. No interviews, no public rebuttal. Because there was nothing left to spin. The cracks had run too deep. Their version of reality had collapsed in on itself. Not because I forced it, but because it was never built to hold. Weeks passed. Back in San Francisco, the fog rolled in early one Tuesday. I was on the balcony, laptop closed, mug lukewarm, sun almost gone. I played the voicemail again. "You humiliated us. You'll regret this." Her voice was flat, practiced. But I didn't regret anything, because I hadn't humiliated them. They had built a house of glass and handed me a hammer. All I did was stop protecting it. No one sued me. No one apologized either. And I didn't need either one. There was nothing theatrical about what followed. No press tours, no bestseller memoir. Just space, breath, the luxury of not having to flinch. My team at the startup stood by me. Our latest pilot program got picked up for city implementation. Not because of scandal, because the work spoke for itself. One night, Miriam stopped by with a bouquet of sunflowers and a half smile. "You're still here," she said, pressing the stems into my arms. "I am," I answered. "Still here, and still me." Ethan grilled dinner on the rooftop. We talked about nothing, about everything, about maybe getting out of town for a bit. Just us. I slept better, laughed louder, stopped bracing for the next hit. I never responded to Maureen's voicemail. Never answered Delphine's PR rep. Let them spin in silence. They never said sorry. But I didn't need them to. What I needed, and finally had, was mine again. My voice, my work, my life, forgiveness, maybe someday. But this was about freedom, and I chose it. Maybe justice isn't always about punishment. Maybe it's just about not disappearing. Being seen, finally and fully, on your own terms. I didn't share this story for sympathy. I shared it because for too long I believed silence was strength, that if I just worked harder, stayed quiet, stayed small, things would fix themselves. But the truth is, silence only protects the people who hurt you. Speaking up doesn't always change the past, but it reclaims your future. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, that your truth was inconvenient or unwanted, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. And you are not crazy for remembering what they hoped you'd forget. Some of us don't get apologies. Some of us don't get justice in a courtroom. But all of us deserve freedom, the kind you earn by refusing to disappear. So maybe ask yourself, what have you been quiet about for too long? Who told you that your truth wasn't worth hearing? Let's talk about it. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me what state you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, I'd still love to hear why, and where you're tuning in from. And hey, if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Real voices, real lives, real healing. Thanks for listening. And remember, your voice isn't too loud. They just weren't ready to hear it.